In my last video, I discussed how I believe that Alexander Usyk could go down as the greatest heavyweight of the last 25 years. And when I consider those sort of things, it's hard not to look back at the reign of the Klitschko brothers, who dominated the early to mid 2000s. We have only 4 lineal heavyweight champions in this century. Lennox Lewis, Wladimir Klitschko, Tyson Fury, who just coming off a 9-year reign, the second longest in history, and Alexander Usyk. Vitali Klitschko was never lineal heavyweight champion. And he was robbed of being that guy. Because when you think of the greatest of all time, you have to be the man who beat the man, right? The lineal champion. Vitali never got that opportunity, and he deserved that opportunity. This goes back to Lennox Lewis' retirement. Lennox Lewis' last fight was against Vitali Klitschko. And in that fight, Vitali Klitschko was the faster, stronger, bigger, and better fighter. But he had a cut in his eye, really bad cut. And despite the fact that he was outboxing Lennox Lewis, and that he was beating Lennox Lewis rather easily, the fight was stopped by the doctor due to the cut. Now, when there's ever any controversy in boxing, which is almost always, you can almost guarantee a rematch is coming. That wasn't the case for Vitali Klitschko and Lennox Lewis. Lennox Lewis decided to become one of the few men in heavyweight history to retire as the lineal champion. I believe it was Gene Tooney who was the first, and Rocky Marciano was the second, and Lennox Lewis is the third. It's only happened 3 times. And when those sort of things happen, it is up to boxing to name a new lineal champion. So it was Max Schmeling back in 1930. And then when Rocky Marciano retired, it was Floyd Patterson. Now, after Lennox Lewis retired, there was a several-year gap. I don't believe Wladimir Klitschko earned the lineal championship status until 2009. But at that time, it was very clear that the greatest heavyweight in the world was Vitali Klitschko. And one of the biggest issues here was that Vitali Klitschko fought the Ring Magazine's number 2 ranked fighter in Chris Bird to become the lineal champion. And he beat Chris Bird. But he wasn't the consensus ranked number 2. He was number 7 on some rankings. And this is where boxing is just kind of too much of a mess with their ranking system and different commissions, different rankings for different, governing bodies. It's a mess. It's a mess. And that's where the UFC has the advantage of just solely having one, and they're just kind of being a little bit more law and order as compared to boxing. And that's why they've kind of been on the rise, where boxing's kind of been on a little decline to some people. But Vitali Klitschko was kind of robbed with boxing's politics of being the lineal champion. Why wasn't it just named immediately? Max Schmeling was immediately ranked the lineal heavyweight champion. Floyd Patterson, in the same year of Rocky Marciano's retirement, lineal heavyweight champion. Why was there such a gap for Vitali Klitschko? Now, Vitali Klitschko is one of probably the greatest boxer to never be lineal heavyweight champion. He was a 3-time boxing heavyweight champion. Only 4 fighters in history have been a 3-time heavyweight champion. It's Vitali Klitschko, it's Lennox Lewis, it's Evander Holyfield, it's Muhammad Ali. That's elite company right there. Now, only Vitali was the only man to not be a lineal champion. Vitali only lost 2 fights in his career. They were both due to doctor stoppages. He was ahead on the scorecard both times. He was ahead in the Lennox Lewis fight. He was ahead in the Chris Byrd fight where he had the injured shoulder and he couldn't keep going, and he was dominating that fight. So when I look at the greatest heavyweight boxers of the last 25 years, we talk about how Usyk and Fury are the definitive 2. Vitali Klitschko deserves a place in that conversation. And one thing to talk about here, which wasn't mentioned in the last video, about where Usyk and Fury rank among the all-time greats, is that one thing that Muhammad Ali always says in comparison is that each new generation of boxers is better than the next. Each new generation of athletes are better than the next. So if that's true, which I believe it is, the Klitschko brothers were probably better than the guys in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. They realistically were. They realistically were stronger. They realistically were better. Maybe they weren't as tough. But the speed difference that they would probably have over Rocky Marciano, over Joe Louis, over Max Baer, over these greats from the pre-Ali Frazier Foreman era, is probably massive. Lennox Lewis probably has a huge advantage over the guys from the 70s, for being honest with ourselves, with how big they were. Think how big the Klitschko brothers were. There's just they're better. They're better athletes overall. And we don't view their era of heavyweights to be all that great. And maybe they weren't. Maybe they were just so much better than the rest. And I think that was probably the case here. As with how much better than the rest Fury and Usyk are. But if we really want to have a conversation of the greatest heavyweights of the last 25 years, Vitali and Wladimir Klitschko have a seat at the table. And I think we're kind of ignoring them as the lead up to this fight continues, because we want to sell this fight and make this fight as interesting as possible. And it already is interesting. Regardless of that. But Vitali Klitschko is probably the man that boxing robs. And that's kind of the main point of this conversation. The politics of boxing prevented Vitali Klitschko from probably being considered the greatest heavyweight of the last 25 years. Because I think you think Vladimir, Tyson Fury, and Alexander Usyk. And really, Vitali deserves to be in that conversation just as much as anybody else, but he was never the lineal heavyweight champion. And the politics of boxing stopped that from happening. And that's on boxing. And that's why people are so frustrated with boxing. And that doesn't happen with the UFC. Dana White does a lot of things that I would disagree with personally. Dana White doesn't allow that BS to fly. And that's why they just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And boxing robs people of opportunities. And it's a shame. Let me know what you think in the comments below of where Vitali Klitschko ranks among the greatest heavyweights of the last 25 years. Or of all time. I think he's one of the best. I think he deserves to be in the conversation of the top 10. Let me know what you think in the comments below.